All right, we are recording now. All right, we are here today, and I'm sure some others will show up with Dan Knudsen, who I'm going to tell you about Dan Knudsen. So I met Dan in the fall of 1987 as freshmen in the dorms at BYU together. Dan's roommate, Derek, and I and the three of us kind of hung out together. Dan was from exotic Virginia, right? Derek and I were from small towns. Derek's from Minot, North Dakota. I'm from Mustang, Oklahoma. And here was this guy from the DC area, fancy schmancy, listened to weird music that none of us had ever heard, and introduced us to the likes of Suzanne Vega and the 10,000 Maniacs and Natalie Merchant. And we just thought that, he was from another planet for a while. But he is a good dude. And we've known each other since then. And through the miracle of social media, have reconnected over the last few years. And I was quite surprised to find out that he and I ended up in the same field, which is strange, after all of these years to find out. I'm going to let him tell you the whole story. I don't know the whole story, so I'm looking forward to hearing it. But what we got real quick, Dan, is as I said, the three students on here are all doctoral students at different levels of their doctoral journey, and we're introducing them to people who work in all sorts of areas of the field. So if you can tell us, and they know we've got you for 30 minutes.
Okay.
So if you can tell us your journey, how did you get into the field? What do you do? What have you done in the field? What do you do now? But they'll ask questions as they go along. You can give them advice on working in the field, anything like that. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good. I am in sunny Arizona now, and it's probably about 105 degrees outside, but I've got a pack full of nieces and nephews on the inside of the house, so I thought I'd come out here and where it's a little quieter. And I will tell you, John Curry was cool before cool was cool, because he was the first snowboarder I ever met in my entire life. I don't even know if there were snowboarders back east in '87. So that's definitely one thing I'll always remember about John Curry. So I think if and when you get out into the world of instructional design, that you'll find that 90% of them kind of fell into it. And that is that's how I came into it. So I got my degree in education, English education. I minored in special ed. And for the first kind of 15 years of my career, I worked for non-public special ed schools, first as a classroom teacher, and then I started developing some programs for schools and school districts. And then that kind of got me into doing some training and starting to learn more about adult learning theory. And then I moved into an instructional design role. My very first instructional design role was with a company called Sitel. They were the kind of the training arm of the Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. And I read the job description, and it said, we need somebody who's proficient with ADDIE, the philosophy of ADDIE. And I had never heard that word before in my life. And I was like, I wonder what that is. So I Googled it, and I was looking at it, and I was like, oh, okay. Seems pretty basic: analysis, design, development, implement, evaluate. Like, that's everything I've been doing as a special ed teacher. So I went into the interview, killed the interview. They asked me about ADDIE. I rattled off a couple of key terms and vocabulary things, and sure enough, I was the one and only and the first instructional designer that they hired at that place. And I'll tell you right now, instructional design is special ed 101, right? What you're doing is you're taking in curriculum, you're taking in information, you're repackaging it to deliver to a different audience. And that's all special ed teachers do all day long. So it was a pretty easy transition for me to do the instructional design part of it. With Sitel, I learned a couple of very important things early on. I did a project for the Washington Cancer Institute. They had a grant with the Susan G. Komen Foundation to do a big, huge training module for cultural awareness and breast health for African-American women. And we sat down in the initial meeting and they kind of gave us what their grant application was. And they said, this is the information that we want to convey. And so I took it back to my office and we met probably for 4 or 5 months on a weekly basis with representatives from the Washington Cancer Institute. And we created a really, really great kind of, this is when Flash animation was kind of new, and Sitel was a great place to work for because not only I was the instructional designer, but I had access to a photographer and a 3D artist and a graphic illustrator and a Flash developer. And so we put together a really great piece that talked about this issue, that talked about why Washington Cancer Center was so interested in it. And we used all of the statistics that they gave us in their grant application. So we're pretty much done with this piece, and we go back to the group, and there's this new person in the group, and she's the director of the Washington Cancer Institute. And we're happy to see her, and we show her the piece, and she's like, you can't use that. You can't do it. She's like, that makes us look bad. I'm not going to let that go out. And so we spent 5 months without knowing who the right person was that we had to get permission from. So if you do anything at all, make sure that you know who's signing off on your project at the end of the day, and that you get their sign off. It took a little while, but we did eventually get her to sign off on it. But that's something that I'll always do. There's a principle in project management called RACI, right? You do a RACI chart, you know who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. And you get all of their information and put it on that chart. And so you know that you're talking to the right people up the happy, we call it the happy chain, right? Who do we have to make happy? Then the other big lesson that I learned at Sitel was ask the right questions. We got brought in to a big meeting about annual reviews and annual certifications that people had to do. And they talked about this topic called SBAR, which is basically a way for the doctors and nurses to communicate during shift change. And all of the root cause analysis is in the hospital. Every time something went wrong, every time something happened, SBAR was always brought up. There was an issue with SBAR. There was an issue with this communication and stuff like that. So every single year, the hospital would teach SBAR. Just, this is how you do it. And this has been the first time I'd ever heard of it. And I was like, I think, these nurses who've been practicing for 15, 20, 30 years, some of them probably know what SBAR is and probably know how to do it. I don't think that's the issue. And so they allowed us to do a focus group of nurses. And the issue was nurses didn't like the doctors, and the doctors talked down to the nurses.
I love it.
And so so instead of rehashing this rudimentary piece of education, we said, look, what you need to do is having hard conversations and doctors respecting nurses. You need to do some kind of competency like that. And sure enough, they did it, and their numbers started to change. But for years, they just had rehashed this. And so that's the other thing. You've got to get really, really good at asking the right questions. From Sitel, I did some contract work for the government. And from there, I moved to Arizona. I worked for the state of Arizona as a chief learning officer in their procurement office. And I guess one of the other things that I'd say, and one of the reasons that I really enjoy instructional design is that you get to learn a lot of different things. You get exposed to a lot of different things. I always tell people when I sit down and interview them or talk to them about what they're trying to do, I always say, look, I'm content neutral, right? It doesn't matter what you have to say or what you're trying to say. I can teach it. I can deliver the information in a better way. So that's you've got to kind of remain that kind of content neutral and open to content. So for the Department of Procurement, I created a certification system for their senior procurement officers. And that was a lot of work and a lot of pulling committees together and things like that. The instructional design piece I found really easy. It's the working with groups and corralling people and the political capitals and all those types of other things, especially when you're working for a government agency that takes some tricks. That take a little bit of getting used to. So from there, I worked for Sprouts. You guys have Sprouts grocery stores in Idaho? No, they're like kind of like a Whole Foods. They're like a major competitor for Whole Foods. They're based here in Arizona. And I was one of two instructional designers for the entire chain. And I worked in their corporate office and worked with their with all of their kind of department leads, all of their the person who was the head of all the butchers and all the stores, and the person who was the head of the bakeries. And we developed different types of trainings. They realized very quickly that the types of people that shopped in their stores were pretty well educated people. And so they wanted their employees to be able to at least talk the language of nutrition and health and things like that. So we made a big focus on just doing really short pieces of information on like water or olive oil or just all these different aspects of different things. And I really enjoyed doing that. Again, we got to learn a lot of different stuff. One of the main things that I learned there was that you've got to be able to tie, and all of my instructional design experience has been in training. I've only ever worked for training divisions. But for training to be effective and for upper management to see the effectiveness of training, you've got to be able to tie it back to a business need. And so that's sometimes the first question I ask. And it really comes down to businesses have two basic needs. They either want to increase revenue or they want to reduce risk. And at the end of the day, if you've got a training initiative and you can tie it to one of those two things, then it's going to stick, because that's really all businesses care about. But being able to take the data, you'll find that if you're working in training departments and stuff like that, that the training departments are often just handed topics. Oh, we need to train on this. We need to train on SBAR, for example, right? But there's nobody really asking, why do we need to train on this? There's nobody really asking, what's the gap, right? We talk about gap analysis quite a lot. So that's something that if you are strong with that analysis piece, with that gap analysis piece, that you will set yourself apart from other instructional designers. If you can go in and say, how do you know this is what needs to be trained on? Get some data, and then use that same data in the back end to evaluate whether or not your training is doing well. It's all just one big circle. But a lot of times, and I think that's why a lot of training departments get a bad rap, or a lot of online training and a lot of in-person training gets a bad rap, is because they're not training the right thing. because nobody asks, how do you know? How do you know this is what really needs to be trained? How do you know this is going to fix the problem? Because a lot of times training departments are just kind of handed topics to train. The closer you can get to the front end of the issue and ask those types of questions, the better. And the more support you can get in the evaluation piece, the better. And by that I mean, yes, you can do testing, you can do certification and stuff like that, but you've got to be able to part of the training that I'm doing now. So now I work for JP Morgan Chase, and I do a lot more consulting with learning people than actual development of training. But one of the things that we always say is that you need a support piece. You know, you're going to teach your employees these new skills, but who's going to watch that they're using them? Who's going to support that they're using, especially if it's online training, right? So we always have like a supplemental one-page guide, a supplemental online course for the managers to say, look, your employees are learning this over the next couple of weeks. Watch and see if they do this, 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 and this. Here's a rubric. Here's something that you can evaluate your employees on, right? Because you want to be able to, at the end of the day, you want to be able to say the training is working, right? It's either working or it's not working. And if it's, you know, it's not working, then you go back to the beginning. But you're not, you know, I'm not seeing the 10,000 people that are taking the trainings that I'm putting together. But the managers are. So it's always good to have some kind of supplemental piece to say, your people are taking this training. This is what they should be doing going forward. Evaluate it, watch it, look at it, see if it's working.
Let me ask you a question, Dan.
Uh-huh.
Have you run across many people who were formally educated in instructional design and yet woefully unprepared to work in the field?
To tell you the truth, John, I have not met one person who has an instructional design degree in all the years that I've been in this business.
I mean, it's awesome, but it's nuts, right? Because we make our career by training people and saying, oh, there's these jobs, which there are,
yeah.
Right? And I'm always fascinated by the gap, because I know there's a gap between theory and practice, right? We talk
Right.
about it in this kind of, you know, highfalutin, you know, ivory tower world, but the type of stuff that you're talking about, we talk about, but in a very different way. What you're talking about is so practical, you know, which is great, but it's very different from a lot of times what instructional design students worldwide hear.
Right. Yeah. I think what you run into, I've always called it kind of the manager problem, right? You're a great employee. You really do your job super, super well. Well, manager's going to see that and they're going to say, okay, well, you're now a manager, right? You're going to manage other employees. That's a completely different skill set.
Yeah.
From being a good employee, being good at your job, and being able to manage people that are good at their job, right? And usually managers are the ones who end up having to train, and that's also a completely different skill set.
Yeah.
So I personally have not met anybody who has an instructional design degree. Especially where I am right now, most of us are like digital developers, a lot of 3D artists, a lot of graphic design people. And so I think there's about 2 or 3 of us that have done a lot of consulting in the past. So I think that's kind of why we're tapped. The role is really as a producer is what we're called, right? We get the information and then we put the plan together and say, okay, the graphic design people are going to do this, the developer people are going to do this, the app people are going to do this, and then we pull it all together and present it back to the client.
I think I cut somebody else off that was going to ask a question. So
sure.
Who was going to ask a question? I'm looking at y'all going, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. All right. So what questions do you have for Dan? Because this is a very different story than what Every other person that they've talked to has had a PhD in the field. So you're the
Oh,
first
okay.
like boots on the ground person.
Yeah.
So what questions do we have?
What are the top 3 skills that you think every instructional designer needs to know?
Working with clients, people skills for sure. Asking good questions and being able to analyze data from like all different types of data sets and stuff. Because people will, you have people in the field that are called, they're the subject matter expert, right? And they're just going to want to dump information on you and just say, train this. And being able to parse through that and decide what is useful and what's not, what needs to be taught and what doesn't to get to the end goal. I'm assuming that she's still talked about, but there was an instructional designer kind of when I was starting in this. Her name was Kat Moore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she does this thing called action mapping, which is a great skill for interviewing clients, right? Because adults don't want to know stuff. Adults want to do stuff. And managers want adults to do stuff. They don't necessarily need to know stuff, right? So that the key to action mapping is you sit down with the subject matter expert and you say, what does the person need to be able to do? Right? Not what do they need to know? Because if you ask that, then you're just going to get this information dump. So what do they need to be able to do? And then from there, what can we help them to practice so that they can do what you want them to do? And then from there, what do they need to know in order to be able to practice? And it's just a great way to outline any course. That's kind of my backbone for most things that I try to train on.
See, I'm looking to see who I got in here. None of these people are going to be in my class this fall. Theoretically, when we talk about instructional design, one of the philosophical questions I like to ask is what's the difference between presenting information and instruction, right? Because they're two very different things. And the answer is practice. Instruction provides the ability to practice. So I love the fact that here you are, right? No degree in the field, but you do it and you obviously do it well. And you're saying, we have to give them the opportunity to practice.
Yeah.
Right. So I love the fact that theory and practice are matching up here.
Yeah. You have to give them the opportunity to fail in a safe environment. Right. And then you have to be able to support that failure and say, this is why it happened. This is how you can, this is how you can fix it. Nobody wants to fail. But that's how you learn.
Well,
right.
You think about Derek, right? So Derek's a surgeon, and I don't want his first surgery, his first time cutting something open, to be on me.
Right.
Yeah. No, thanks. I want him to have
right.
hours and hours and hours of doing that before he
And
gets
someone else
anywhere near me.
Yeah. So Cytel, the healthcare organization I worked for back east, they were actually a simulation laboratory.
Nice.
And so they were kind of cutting edge into that VR, AR technology. We were using simulated Da Vinci robots to train surgeons on before they even saw or the real robot, before they even saw a real patient with the real robot. That's really what Cytel kind of put their bread and butter on. But yeah, the closer you can get to reality in terms of your instruction and the scenarios that you're building, obviously the better. And so I would say interviewing skills is probably one of the top skills that you'll need to have. You've got to be able to ask the right questions to get down to really what the root of the issues are and the root of the information that people need to know.
Did he get you 3 things, Candace?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay.
Other questions?
I have a question. Since you were basically self-taught, did you find any particular resources or books or tools useful in kind of growing your instructional design skills?
Kat Moore is probably really the only one that I read kind of extensively, just because she was super practical. She just had really, really good templates and things like that. So super practical. There's another one, her name is Jane, and I can't think of her last name. It's either like Hogarth or Bo something. But she also had some good information. If I remember, I'll
Did
send
she
it to
have,
John.
did she have like an e-learning page? Was that her?
Yes.
Yeah, I know what
Yeah.
you're talking about. Dadgummit, what's her name?
I think it starts with a B. It's like Bogarth or Bo something.
Because at that time, it was like her and Tammy Bean and a
Mhm.
bunch of others were kind of all
Yeah.
blogging at the same time and sharing stuff. And
Yeah, and again, my center's always been training, and I would say 90% of that has been e-learning. What I did with Arizona, there was in the certification program, there was some classroom aspects of that. But even then, we practiced what we call the flipped classroom,
Mhm.
right? So the people had to do a bunch of e-learning stuff before they could even get to the classroom. So that way, the expert that you're paying to be in the classroom for 8 hours isn't going over vocabulary and isn't going over, all the stuff that they should know coming into it. He or she is talking about scenarios and real life examples and things like that. So, but again, that's that support piece. You've always got to have something where you can evaluate and support the people after the training is implemented. Or it's just not going to go anywhere, right? They're just going to go back to their old ways and old habits. A lot of offshoots of instructional design that people will find themselves either drawn toward or interested in or put on a committee for. Knowledge management is one that a lot of companies are talking about. Our team, the team that I'm on currently, is really starting to get pushed into user interface design. I use a lot of the principles that I use every day to design. I have a school bus that we ripped out and made a mobile escape room in it. And so we create personas and we create issues and scenarios to see how people are going to solve these different problems, to help us design that. So they're applicable across fields, but again, at the end of the day, it's special ed, right? It's bringing in information, repackaging it, and putting it back out in a way that's more supportive and easy for people to digest.
I love the randomness of it. You control for everything, and then there's something that you can't control that happens.
Yeah.
Right? When you design
Yeah.
that, I think, Dan, my first corporate training gig, right? I was, as a software trainer, they'd hire us to go in, and it's back when Windows 95 was coming online. So we'd have to go train people from 3.1 to 95 and teach them all that stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
we got contracted to go into Morton Thiokol and literally train the rocket scientists how to use Windows 95.
Yeah.
And so we had a great curriculum. It was really well done. The manuals were fantastic. We go do the morning and it's smooth sailing, nothing going wrong. We break for lunch and we come back and we just can't, the room's gone and we can't figure out what's going on. It's just everything's wonky. People are in a wonky mood. I finally pulled somebody aside that I'd been talking to that morning, and I said, "What's going on?" Oh, they handed out pink slips while you were over lunch. And so everybody was in a bad mood. Like a third of the people had to finish out the day, and they were in our training, and they were like, "Why
They
am
were
I even
getting
doing
fired.
this?"
Right.
You know, you can't control that, but it
No.
just, you know, I found when I worked in training, like there was always it's always the thing that you can't control.
Yeah,
It's always the thing that you can't control. You think about everything.
absolutely. This escape room that I love and probably takes up way too much of my time. You know, you design stuff and you put stuff in certain places and you say, okay, this is going to combine with this to make this, and then they'll get this combination. And every single time a group went into the room, they did it differently. You know, they figured it out, but they figured it out a different way than we'd ever thought of before, right? We had some like 80-year-old guy hack a radio that he had to find the batteries, and he didn't have the batteries, but he hacked it. He like figured out how to get it started without having to find the battery. And I was just like, you're exactly right. You can't control for everything. And you'll find that the same way with your instruction. Everybody thinks differently. There's no way to plan for how people are going to approach or how people are going to see your stuff.
Yeah. Other questions for Dan? No? All right. Hey, man. Hey, we got to get together and talk some more.
Absolutely, John.
And we got to get Derek on here. I took a picture of the screen and I posted it on Facebook, and I said, "Derek, everybody's in class but you." And so now he's like, "How come nobody told me?" So at any rate, we gotta get
Awesome.
the three of us together, man. But hey, thanks for your time. You take care, and I'll get back in touch with you. Okay.
Okay, John. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.